Hello, welcome to Stories in Time from Home. It'll be from my home because with the quarantines, that we've not been going down to the tape to do it. We do it right from the house. It's a little more intimate, don't you think? And today we've got a fascinating guest, and I'm so happy that you're here to meet Dr. Patricia Maclay. And I'm going to let her tell you how she became a doctor. Where did she go to school? What did she do? Was it hard or easy? So we're going to meet her right now. Hello, Patricia. Thank you so much for coming.
Ellouise, thank you so much for allowing me to be your guest. I was so excited to be here today to talk a little bit about what it was like to be a woman in the earlier times of our America, being around 1950 on, and what it's like now. And I actually was born in a family. I was the second of six in an area of Western Pennsylvania to parents who were blue-collar workers. And so it was a challenge to begin to think about what I was going to do with my life and my career, especially when I really began to focus on the idea of either becoming an historian or going into the field of medicine. And the path led me into medicine, which was quite a challenge because there was not a lot of financial support for that. I was able at the time to kind of, what my counselor said, ride the crest of financial aid for women going into medical school. It was the beginning of when they were trying to change those statistics to allow more women to be into the profession. So I initially did 3 years and 2 years at the University of Pittsburgh in order to get those grants because they were going to be cutting off very shortly thereafter. I went to the Medical College of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, which was originally the Women's Medical College. And after 2 years, I transferred to Mount Sinai in New York City and did all of my training there. So I did my final 2 years of medical school. I graduated, was an intern. We did 2 years residency. I was one of the first female chief residents at Mount Sinai. And I did 2 years of my fellowship, which was in rheumatology, which has to do with arthritis.
Okay, that's a lot, but it gives us a lot to think about. I had a few things run right through my life, having been a young woman, going into what would be what I wanted to be. How did you decide? I have a couple of questions and then you deal with it. How did you decide to deal with medicine? And the other thing, when you look at all of that scope that you were in, what was one of the most difficult challenges and what was the happiest day?
I think the decision was really a difficult one, but I decided I really wanted to do something that was going to be helpful for humanity. And not that history is not important, but it was something that was much more hands-on and exciting, and to a certain level, a challenge, because it was something that would be very difficult to do. And I kind of like challenges and being outside of the envelope. Mm-hmm. And so I chose to do that. And probably the most challenging thing that I had to deal with was being a woman in the career. Our medical school class of 100 had only 6 of us in the class. And although at Mount Sinai, they were very welcoming to women, those outside, like your patients sometimes, would not be as welcoming to have a woman, especially if it was a man you were examining, to have a woman there. Very, again, beginning to be out of the ordinary. And this is now in the early 1970s. Yeah. But probably my happiest moments were actually being able to wear the white coat and graduating and being able to give back to so many people who helped me make it to that point.
With your stethoscope hanging around your neck?
Yes.
Or hanging out of your pocket?
Oh, Ellouise, there were so many stories we could talk about that New York City at the time, because we were there doing not only the celebration of the 200th, the 1976 time, but also the burning of Harlem in that period. So it was a very interesting time.
Right. I'm sure it was. And I think all of these things that you're talking about, and then we're going to other things that you have to share with us, is that it's inspirational for young women that would be hearing you today because it's changed. There's a difference. But was there any particular person that was an inspirer for you and that sort of encouraged you to keep on? Because there are days when you're ready to go home.
You know, it's funny, people have asked me that, and I can't point to a person in medicine. I can point to my grandmother, who was a very strong woman from Germany and a minimum education, but she self-educated, and she really wanted her grandchildren, of whom were 26, to make it to a higher level of education. And she kind of pre-selected me to be that person she was going to really support. Little care packages in undergraduate, little care packages in med school. But that kind of support, that singular impact of one individual on your life is huge. Which is why I like to spend my time really trying to reach out and lift up other women, if I possibly can, to help them move forward in their own careers, regardless of whether it's medicine or not.
Yeah. Do you think that women are as nervous about taking those jumps, jumping into what they're doing, as they were at the time of the 50s, 60s, 70s? You know, in other words, there was fear for women.
There was a lot of fear. I mean, you not only, as they say now, you not only had to equal men, but you had to do better than men. You had to be able to get yourself to stand out and really be able to put forth and shine in the class. It goes back even to the 1849, when Elizabeth Blackwell, the very first physician ever to be given a degree, had to majorly outshine. She had to take her exams more than once. And the same for Rebecca Krempler, who was the first African-American woman in 1856. So we were definitely challenged. I think now, where the medical school population is pretty much 50-50, I still think that women need to try to feel they have to do better than men, because it is just still somewhat balanced in favor of men and looking at men and what they do. So I don't think women should be afraid of going into the profession, any profession. My daughter's an attorney. My youngest daughter's an actor. But I think that it is a place where any of us can go. But sometimes you have to just really try to excel to get into that equal position or better.
Absolutely. Tell us about the feeling of being the first senior in your residency after you were into the medical school. You were the first of what?
We were six.
I love it when women can say that they were the first.
We were 6 out of 100, and when I started medical school there, and again, I started my 3rd and 4th year there. But when you are finished with med school, you have your internship where you spend 1 year learning at the boots of everybody else, but it's an incredible experience. And then 2 years of medical residency. And I was surprised when I was picked to be one of the 3 chief medical residents, because at that point, some of the schools were thinking and doing a lot of work to not make it one singular chief resident, but to have that experience over a number of people. But predominantly it's always men. And so I was tickled that I was able to be one of the first females to be able to go into that position. And it is a position where you have a lot of responsibility for education of your colleagues, as well as representing the medical school in situations, and have a closer relationship with the heads of the different departments. So it was very, very challenging. It was fun. I love being at Mount Sinai, because they were very, very welcoming and understanding of the situation that they were trying to do, which was push many more women into the profession.
Well, the thing that you told me the other day was that Mount Sinai Medical School was new. And, you know, because you really surprised me with that. I knew about Mount Sinai Medical School for nursing, but hadn't heard about the medical school. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the nursing school was very, very old. It was there established long before, but the medical school actually started in 1968. And I was in the graduating class of 1974. So there still weren't a lot of other physicians around who were actually above me. There were not many. They started with 56 in the first class. So it was a different kind of school, but it was wonderful because you had a lot of intimate one-on-one time learning. And the unique thing about Mount Sinai, which still I think to this day, is a large portion of and back then the majority of those who taught you had their own private practices, which meant you had more of an intimate understanding what it was like to see a patient than someone who's teaching you who only is in the lab or spends very little time with patients. So I give a lot of credit to my strength as being a clinician to that kind of education, and the fact that I was in the right place at the right time to be a woman in a school that was interested in women and was interested in doing very intimate teaching about patient care.
There's something, I've been around young doctors, and so I know some of the things that go on, but did something scare you? Did you have an experience in the beginning, something that you felt like you had really achieved a success, or something that scared you?
I think coming from a background of poverty, where I hadn't had as many experiences, I think, as some of my colleagues who were in my medical school class, many things were, I don't want to say scary, but somewhat intimidating. And I had to quickly learn how to not only be a student physician or being an intern and resident, but I had to live in New York City, which by itself was a change from a tiny town in Western Pennsylvania that had 2 traffic lights. So there was a really exponential curve of learning that I had to do in addition to just the medical things. But I love learning. And so that part wasn't the hard part. It was just really acclimating to a different environment, which was also learning. So I came to love it. I came to love living in New York City, every part of it, and every turn of the history of New York City from the time period I was there, from 1972 through 1979. And there was a lot of turmoil during that time. So it was, I can't really say scary. I mean, there were some scary experiences that you're called to do as a chief resident or a resident, but not personally. It was acclimation is probably the word for me.
Right. Well, dealing with patients who are quite sick for the first time or in the middle of it before you've been given a degree, is scary because you don't know. At least I've seen people who said, they didn't feel quite up to that moment. They got through it, but it was a scary moment.
I think that point is true because AIDS was just starting then, and Sinai was an international catchment area for cases from everywhere. And we began having the cases of Kaposi sarcoma and some of the side effects of AIDS. And that made us all kind of step back and realize that our approach to these patients was not that we were not going to be loving and caring, but we had to be very cautious as to how we handled blood and how we handled secretions and such like that. So,
and you must have real feeling for the people that are in the hospitals today.
Yes.
With the virus is threatening. And so does that give you a feeling for this, or do you look at it and wonder what they're doing and how they're managing?
No, my heart goes out to those who are at the front line now, because I'm not. And having been through those experiences, I know how difficult it is, how real this illness is. I have friends right now who have some of the long-term side effects of COVID, with the brain and the clotting and the neurologic symptoms and the cardiac symptoms, the heart symptoms. And this is a very real disease, and it must be respected. And the difficult thing about COVID is because it is a coronavirus, which is similar to the common cold. And so it is going to be a challenge creating a vaccine when people have said, why can't we create a vaccine to the common cold?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing, but my heart goes out to them because all the stories about what it's like to be at the front line, yes, they're true. They're very true.
Yeah, and sometimes I felt like what you'd hear, what I heard in the news, what you hear, and I'd love to hear what you think about this. And people were not, and I think there's still a lot of them out there that aren't willing to accept that. They are not willing to accept that this is a real disease that can hurt you, that you could be dead tomorrow.
One of the things that I do is also teach a lot about stress and the relationship between stress and disease. I call it choosing wellness. And one of the things that happens when people get into a cycle of fear, which is happening a lot right now at various levels of messaging, is that fear takes you away from your ability to be in the frontal part of your brain called the frontal cortex. And it's there that you do rational thinking and thought. And so fear stokes up more fear, which stokes up more anxiety. So the ability to process even some of the simple orders, such as please wear a mask, please social distance 6 feet, is not sometimes processed. And when you're already in a situation of fight or flight, your reaction to being told what to do is to, almost like the 5-year-old, stamp your feet down and go, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to fight against that because it's fight or flight. That's what stress is. It's fight or flight. And so many people, trying to give the benefit of the doubt, are in such levels of anxiety and fear that they're reacting completely. But the national messaging isn't helping at all. But you know, sometimes people just have that kind of response and need to be gently instructed as to why this is very important. And of course, it's a disease that is not, you can't see it. And now that we know that aerosolization, meaning it's easily placed into the air, it can remain in an environment for more than a few hours. It can, especially if it's a humid environment where the air is not moving, you have to be very careful in closed environments. And when you're out running down a track, when there's a person, yeah, they're 6 feet in front of you, but if it's a humid day and the wind's not blowing, you have to have second thoughts about whether you want to get that close to someone. So there's a lot of thought goes into it, and the public doesn't know a lot of these things, and the messaging isn't getting it out that well.
You know, what I was wondering about was, where did you go when you had finished all of your work at Sinai?
I had the opportunity to return to the area, Western Pennsylvania, and to a medical practice that was rheumatology. It specialized in rheumatology. But nicely, it also did internal medicine, which allowed me to keep that total body perspective as well as specialize. There's where the challenge came in being a woman, because I was in a practice with 5 other men and was not looked upon as an equal citizen in the practice. The deal was I was supposed to work for 5 years and get a partnership. That had to be legally challenged. So it was a very difficult time, and a time that I think sometimes may still exist now in some situations, but it was a challenge to me as a woman and not being recognized. And one of the things that happened was that I began doing radio and TV in Western Pennsylvania, and that increased my population of patients significantly. And I think there might have been some feelings of jealousy, perhaps.
I'd be willing to accept that as a part of what happened.
And so it finally left me, it put me in a situation where I moved to Orlando, Florida, and began my own practice, which was wonderful. And I totally enjoyed it.
Now, if young women came to you or wanted your advice, or even a middle-aged woman came to you today and said, I love what you talk about when you're a doctor, what do you think? Do you think it would be too difficult to go to school now?
If you love the idea of going into medicine and you love the idea of being willing to serve, then definitely go to med school. Yes, there are long hours sometimes. Yes, there are situations that can be difficult, but the reward is so huge. It is just so positive. And one of the things I teach about is when you do something good, you get lots of endorphins and serotonins. You make lots of positive, happy chemicals. You make a lot when you're a doctor. If you really are there to care for people and not looking necessarily at the financial outcome, but definitely there to love people and care for them, then it's wonderful.
Great. Thank you. That's such a great answer. But, you know, I keep thinking, I'm interested in what you're saying now, but I know that you've got something else to tell us about. And it's a little bit of history, isn't it?
Like I said, when I was in high school, it was a difficult decision whether I was going to go into history or medicine. And I chose medicine. And now that I'm retired, I can do history. So this being the 100th anniversary of the suffrage movement, of women winning the right to vote, I have my little suffrage sash because we've been working on a program about suffrage. This is the 100th anniversary year. I'm also a commissioner with the Montgomery County Commission for Women, and our virtual program will be out on August 19th, and it will talk all about various aspects of women's right to vote. But
is it going to be on TV?
We are working with Montgomery College TV, and it will be on Facebook, our Commission for Women Facebook and our Commission for Women YouTube, and will be streamed through Montgomery College. And it has been the most exciting experience. Like I said, I had to learn rapidly and acclimate to get to live in New York City. They never taught videography and how to make video productions in med school. So it was a really exciting learning curve for me. Plus I was in charge of trying to find a lot of the people that were going to getting some of the channeling and looking for fundraising. So it's been a wonderful experience. I love being a commissioner. And so our program is going to teach a lot about suffrage and the history of suffrage. And in particular, it will be Montgomery County centric.
Okay, this is interesting about suffragettes and suffrage, learning about suffrage. If you had to teach yourself, learn yourself, all that kind of stuff, what's one of the most interesting things that you bump up against?
I think for a Marylander, I think that one of the most important, interesting facts I found out was when people say, well, who was the first person to ask for the right to vote? And everybody goes, well, Abigail Adams. And indeed, in a way she was, but you really have to go back to 1647 and an incredible woman by the name of Margaret Brent, who came to America when she was in her 30s. And because she was a self-taught woman who was both owned a plantation, dealt in taxes, paid taxes, and became a confidant of then Lord Baltimore, the first Lord, the Calvert, she became his executrix. And then after he died, she was in charge of doing his estate. And it was a very difficult time because Maryland was a Catholic colony and the Protestants had invaded this Catholic colony during a period of Charles I. And so there was a lot of turmoil, and she was responsible for helping the soldiers who fought on behalf of Lord Baltimore, who had had no wages. She got them to calm down, and she settled a lot of the estate issues. But then she said to herself, I have done this. I have a right to not only engage in civic activity, but I have a right for the vote. And in January of 1647, she walked into the Assembly of Maryland, which was in St. Mary's, and she said, I want the right to vote. So not only was the first person to ask for the right to vote a woman who was acting as an attorney, but she was also a Marylander and one of the Maryland founding mothers. So
makes you feel good, doesn't it?
Yes, let's hear it, Maryland.
Women, are you listening? Are you touching base with the fact that we live in a state that had that as a start?
Very first.
That's really important, really. What do you think about today for the women realizing how important it is for them to vote? I'll say that, yes, it's important to vote.
It is critically important to vote. We have to have the woman's voice heard because the woman's voice does bring with it experiences and perceptions that are much different than men's. The old joke of men being out hunting for the saber-toothed tiger and the woman at home caring for the baby, stirring the pot and kicking the tiger out the door is critical because we as women are much more perceptive about the needs of society. So we need to have more women in office. We need to have women voting for those issues that will support the needs of women and girls because they are often overlooked.
I think that's true. I think I've noticed on various news programs and panels and this sort of thing, that there certainly are more women today who are in those positions, and they're really speaking their mind. And that I'm old enough to know that it's been a long time to get to that place. And it makes me feel good to see them doing that. And what I'm hoping, and do you see any of it, is that the young women are really understanding what their responsibility is and to bring more young women in as registered voters. What do you think about that?
I think young women are. I've got 2 daughters and I have a certain bias on that, but I do think they're much more invested and engaged in civic society. And I think they understand the importance of the vote. And also the importance of getting into the professions and excelling and getting on boards and being able to show that women have the ability to deal equally well, but with a greater sensitivity to the needs of society. So one of the things we do at the Commission is definitely work to support women and girls, not only in areas of need, but in areas of emerging leaders, in areas of helping women be able to attain and work toward getting in office and supporting women in Montgomery County. So, which is why we have this, we're excited about our virtual program because we do one of the opening things, and I don't want to give a lot of it away because it's a variety show. It's fun. It is not just talking heads, as they say. And so we have an opening number that really talks about the importance of youth being civically engaged and the importance of voting later on. And so we have a lot of things we're going to address in that show, August 19th at 7 p.m.
That's great. I'm just delighted to hear about that, you know, and to be able to put it out there so more people will hear it and will come to see what y'all have put together. But as I was listening to you and what you've done and your family and everything, raising children and having a hard job is a tough thing. It's a difficult thing, and it requires a lot of adjustments for women. What have you found in that, both for yourself and what you hear from other people?
I mean, my career was very difficult because I was raising two young children in a office environment that was not accepting of that. I do think it is somewhat better today, but I'm sure I cannot take a brush and whitewash it, because I'm sure there are still many, many women who struggle. In fact, I do know they struggle with trying to balance, because there's still somewhat the idea that the woman takes care of the child and makes the dinner and the husband goes out and gets the job, which was a very 50s image. I think it still exists in some situations. Luckily, I don't see that in my two girls in their professions, but I do know that it probably does. And the importance of women to have more help. I mean, look right now with the COVID situation and trying to go back to school. We're one of the few nations that does not have some support for childcare in our country. That's an issue many women could definitely get on in terms of getting legislation and voting. We don't have childcare, which makes it very difficult. And people are looking at the school system now as a form of childcare in some situations. So I can't say, I think it's probably somewhat easier, but not, I think, an awful lot easier today than it was before, balancing those two things for a career, but it's worth it.
Well, I think so. I agree. I had not young, but middle young children. I went back to college when I was about 32 years old, and I had some elementary schools. But if you really feel a need to do those things, you will do them. Mm-hmm. You will figure out, you will lengthen it out, maybe do it not all at one time. But I think that now I hear of and see women who are actually going after it more than they did, you know, in 1968 when I went back to college. So that, you know, it makes a big difference.
I think the other thing too, a very important point about that is if you do have children and you're a professional woman, the model, being that role model for your own children, being a person who is in a profession and contributing to society, and your children see that, is probably one of the most important role models they could ever have, is seeing their mother be engaged in what is important in society.
I agree totally. And unfortunately, you have had so many interesting and wonderful things to say today, which I feel is really a great thing you brought here for more people to hear. And we wish you success with the event for suffrage. I know that I'll be watching it, and we're going to have to say goodbye for now, but it won't be forever. It won't be forever.
Thank you, Ellouise. I've totally enjoyed being here with you.
Yeah, take care. And the rest of you, remember and come back. Well, there'll be something next week, but we'll have a guest in about 2 weeks. Your program will run for 2 weeks. So even if it's going to run right up against the time that the event will go open, you know, for more public. But I think that it'll be played later. So don't give up on that. It's going to be there. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much. Good luck. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.